Jesus told a lot of parables, and we know those parables. You know, he taught in stories because he knew people remember the stories. That was his style of teaching. Tell a story with a point, they'll remember what you're trying to tell them. And boy, did he tell beautiful stories. One of my favorite, of course, is the prodigal son. You got the father, you got the older brother who never leaves home but resents the father for giving the younger brother who wasted all of his money. And then there's the famous parable of the king who took his 3 servants and gave them each a certain amount of money to invest and do something with. And the one doubled it, and the other one doubled it, and the other one buried it in the ground. Then, of course, there's the famous shepherd with his flock of 100 sheep, and one gets lost. And he goes and he finds the lost sheep, puts it on his shoulders, and carries it back. You know, very beautiful stories. There's the woman who sweeps her floor looking for the coin that's been lost. There's the fisherman who picks the dragnet and pulls out the sea. There's the sower who goes out to seed, and some of the seed falls on the pathway, some of it falls among the weeds, some among the rocks, and some on the good soil. But the amazing thing about all these parables is he never tells us the father's name, he never tells us the son's name, he never tells us the widow's name, he never tells us the shepherd's name, he never tells us the name of any of these people, the king's name, his servant's name. He doesn't give any names to anybody. Now we know the Samaritan, but we won't know the Good Samaritan story, but we just know he's a Samaritan. We don't know his name. Except one parable, he mentions the person's name. And that one we had about, I want to say a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. It was that story about the rich man and the poor man who lived at the gate, who longed for the crumbs that fell off the table of the rich man's house. And that rich man would feast, the scriptures say, would feast every day, but he didn't care at all about the poor man outside the door. He didn't hate the poor man. He was totally indifferent to the poor man. Remember this, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. He was totally indifferent to that poor man who was so hungry. And remember the story, they both die. And the poor man's in heaven sitting next to Abraham. And, the other rich guy's down somewhere else below where it's very, very hot. And he's looking up in his misery, and he sees the man sitting next to Abraham. And he says to Abraham, if you could only send him back to my brothers, they'd believe it if they saw a man rise from the dead. And Abraham says, even if they saw someone rise from the dead, they would not believe. Remember the name of that man, that poor beggar man? Lazarus. Jesus names that beggar person Lazarus. That is no accident. Because the story today is about another Lazarus whom Jesus raises from the dead. And at the very end of the passage, and he's raising this person from the dead. He's not raising someone like he raised the widow, the son of the widow in Nain. Nain's an obscure, tiny little town way in the north of Galilee that no one probably ever heard of. He raises Jairus' daughter, same area, all the way out in the sticks. But this miracle takes place 1.5 miles from the center of Jerusalem. Bethany is like to Jerusalem as Fraser is to Sterling Heights. I mean, you can walk from the middle of downtown Fraser. You could, if you're on a nice warm morning, you can walk easily to say Malachy and light a candle in the shrine. We have actually people who do that and come and walk to the shrine, get their steps in. That's how close Bethany is. Right now, it's been incorporated by the city of Jerusalem, but in Jesus' day, it was basically a suburb. And that's what it was. And so there were a lot of people in Jerusalem out there to see this and to see what Jesus would do. And he calls Lazarus from the tomb. Lazarus rises from the dead. And the scripture passage ends, it says, many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what had been done began to believe in him. Well, what does that mean, began to believe in him? This particular passage, this particular event takes place just before Jesus is going to enter Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. These are very connected events. Jesus has now made his name in Jerusalem by this miracle. And how these people are going to react is going to unfold in the 2 gospel readings you're going to hear next week. Because on Palm Sunday, remember, you get 2 gospel readings. We begin the Mass with the gospel reading. Then we have the procession of palms. Then we have our opening prayer, first reading, responsorial hymn, second reading, and then we read the Passion. And in those 2 readings, what these people began to believe takes root. And we understand what's going on and what it means for us today. I'm going to leave you hanging today. All I'm going to say is, think about what you think these people might believe in him, what they're coming to think about him, and what do we really think about Jesus in our life. See you next week.